These are the 5 mistakes beginners make in Twinmotion. And even if you don't consider yourself to be a beginner, in this video, it'll still share many valuable tips and help you improve your workflow and achieve higher graphical outputs. With Twinmotion, you can achieve massing context really fast in under 5 minutes. And the way you do that is you go under Context, Urban, and then this OpenStreetMaps pops in, and you can go in and either search on this bottom right corner where the magnifying glass is, or you can use the map and zoom around to find your location. And so once you've done that, there's this rectangle that provides a zone for you to grab. And so when you do that, you can move around the map, and everything within this zone will be collected and shown up on your screen. And then from there, you go to the right and you can grab everything together. And so as you see now, all this context has appeared around our model. And so this is great for just quick massing, but also great for lighting to show how the lighting compares to other buildings around the site. But for now, I think what we're going to do is get rid of that and move on. But it's really fast. You can choose different locations and backgrounds, which is very helpful. So you see this skyline background, how it doesn't quite fit the vibe. One way you can change that is go down to the eye, and then one sec. Let's see. So if you want to change the background, what you can do, one way you can do that is go all the way to settings and then location. And from there, you can also choose what location and map you are in. And this will help with the lighting. So the lighting will be different in the sun angle depending on where you put this location, the time of year, etc. And this is really important for getting good lighting for renders. And you can see how changing the location and angle of the sun provides different shadows. But when you go to change the background, you do background, you can rotate the background, whatever seems fit. There's all these options here for backgrounds. But if you want a more extensive library, you can go to the HDR elements, and it provides these outdoor environments where you can go through and select HDR environments that you can put in your background for final renders and things like that. But you can also use these for night renders, providing different opportunities there. You just download them and then drag them in to the scene. Sometimes people forget that you can use the Quixel library as well as just the normal library to provide 3D assets like buildings. So if you don't like the normal massing shown with the white boxes, you can actually import physical buildings. So you can do that from the Quixel Megascans, and then also just by searching buildings in the search bar. So you get all these materials. Sometimes you'll get these buildings. You can be more specific and better things will pop up. So you can get like an office building to import and all different things like that. Beginner users of Twinmotion must realize that you can use what is available, that you can use more than what is available in Twinmotion for materials. So everyone is probably familiar with the basic library that Twinmotion has. But did you know that in the Quixel Megascans, if you have an Unreal Engine account, you can go into Surfaces, and then there's a more extensive library of materials. So not only does it give you a category of metal, but it gives you corroded, bared, corrugated, different types that provide higher realism. And also, when you were to look at some of these, the materials aren't just shiny, brand new materials, they provide depth and texture. This one's rusty, another one's dirty. And when you see buildings in real life, it's not all brand new. And so this really provides a great opportunity to have realistic renders. But you can also go to websites like Polyhaven and Free Textures on Polygon. And from there, they have extensive libraries where you can actually find materials that you like and download them. So these not only give you high quality, up to 8K realistic materials, but you get bump textures and other material assets that help include good settings to provide very realistic PBR materials. But when you go back to Twinmotion, you might have very good materials, but let's say with this current wall right here, it seems a little bit too new, and so let's mess it up. So what you can do is actually go into Decals in Quixel Megascan, and so what this will be, it doesn't have to specifically be accurate, but for concrete, let's say, there's patches, so for streets and other stuff like that, you can have realistic representation of what it looks like. So like if you were to put like a damage patch, let's say, let's download this and put it on a wall. Obviously you wouldn't have it at the highest capacity or the highest opacity, excuse me. But what it does is it gives it just some imperfections, and sometimes those imperfections are super important just to not make everything seem so realistic. Or not realistic, but not so fake. So you kind of turn down the opacity of this, but the diffusion of different colors and materials definitely sets it apart from being one straight material. And sometimes it just helps break up the repetitivity. That is not a word, but it helps break up the repetition in the architecture. And that's one of the keys to architecture visualization, is breaking up repetitive programs and elements. There's another thing, so let's click on another material right here. So we'll go down here, click on this, and what you can actually do is if you put in a new material on there, because this is an exported material, but let's change this material. It can still be wood, but it'll be a Twinmotion material. And so what you can do from there, you can add texture to it. We can also turn on weather, turn off weather, and how it interacts with that. You can go to the metalness. Obviously, you wouldn't do that here, but that's one way you can work on stuff. And there's just a bunch of different ways you can mess with these settings. Now what I'm trying to look for is grudge. And so under color, if you turn up the grudge of it, you can see the material starts to become more worn. So this is 100%, and you can see how discolored that wood material is as opposed to being perfect. And so finding a good balance and using grudge properly can really elevate your renders. Now, one of the helpful things, as you can see in the layers, are these groups, these folders being made. And so this file has a lot of little folders and compartments, and sometimes that may be confusing, especially if you are working with very big models and stuff like that. So to keep things better organized, right now there's a folder for everything in this model, so all the buildings and stuff like that, and then there's the site context. So if you want to turn that off, as you can see, those site buildings are now gone, so they're in their own container is what Twinmotion calls it. But you can see how we added that plaster patch and how it started its own spot. So a helpful thing to do is right click, create a new container, and let's call this trees. And I spelled that wrong, that's okay. But what you can do is set this as the active container. So what that does is if we go and start adding vegetation and trees, everything that we place will go inside that container. And so when you're placing multiple trees in multiple containers, it'll just help organize your overall file. And so if you have too many trees at once, what you can do is just hide it all, and it's already in that container. You don't have to organize it or spend any more time on it. And so that's a very good way to speed up your process and keep your file organized. Does your grass and tree elements look unrealistic in your renders? This is how you can step up your vegetation graphics. So right now, this is a very basic grass. It just kind of looks yellow-green and isn't super interesting. But what we can do is add a grassy material. And so we'll go to ground cover and add some more realistic grass. And that helps a little bit. This looks a lot more realistic, but let's not stop there. Another thing we can do is go down into context and then vegetation paint. Excuse me, that's not the right one. We'll go through that one later. You'll go to vegetation scatter. And what this does is you can select, let's say, long grass or something like that, and then you'll place it down here. Maybe there's some imperfections, so some weeds, some clovers, stuff like that. And what you can do, you can also add flowers. This is just to show an example. It's not the best way to achieve this. But what we can do is go to settings. You can adjust the size and stuff like that. Go to this paint bucket that says scatter add. And what this does is basically it starts adding imperfections and all these things that we were trying to introduce into the area. And I'm not sure, it's a pretty big diameter, and so I think that's why it's adding, not adding it properly, but you get what I'm trying to achieve with this. So let's try some longer grass. I think I've slowed down the file a little too much, but see, it adds a lot of 3D grass versus having a 2D texture like that. And let's see how we can start to adjust that. Anyway, as you can see, it gives it more depth and just more realism in that grass texture. Obviously, you need to control it a little bit more, but that is a great way to add realism to your renders, because it's not just going to be a perfectly manicured lawn most of the time. There are going to be a few weeds or taller hairs of grass. And another thing, even if you do this all over, it's not going to totally affect the speed of your model, because once you get far enough away, you can see it disappear. It is there, but when you zoom in, it comes back in focus. But this is a great thing Twinmotion does, so it doesn't slow down your model or your file. And what I was showing you before, so when you scatter, it comes in one layer at once, so you can just hide it and not have to worry about it again. And so what I was about to show you earlier is the vegetation paint. And so what you can do is drag these trees all together into one little container. And you can do as many as you want. But then what you do, you can click on the trees, change the density. And for this purpose, I'm just going to turn the density up, even though it might not be super realistic. But what we can do with this density is we go to the paint. And even though this is a parking lot, we're going to paint the trees. You can change the diameter of the brush. And so this is just how it does it. It paints it all together. And you just move your cursor and it'll paint it there, give them the proper spacing they need. So a bigger brush means it'll be applying more trees at once and probably crash your file, as I almost did. So I'm going to have to hide that real quick. But that's why those containers and layers are so effective. So now we're going to move on, and we'll probably go back to the original model and set that as the active container. So when you look at glass or towards a window, with the right light, you can always see the reflection and the surrounding context around you. Renders are supposed to look the same way. you shouldn't be able to see right through the glass either. Um, although it is supposed to be like translucent or even transparent glass, you still need somewhat of a reflective property. To create realistic reflections, you must first convert this material into like a better Twinmotion glass. And so right now we'll just do a basic clear glass. And you can see there's some reflection. It's very faint, but you can see into the building a lot more than you probably want to. So one way you can combat that visibility is turn your opacity up, but that still doesn't improve your reflection. So what you can do is you can turn on imperfections in the settings. That can kind of help with some realism. But even more, you can change to be two-sided, so it's very, very thick and you can't see as much. But another way is you can go between standard and colored. And so what this does is gives you the ability to change the color of the glass. And although it still keeps the same properties of the glass, the difference between the two is this gives the normal glass with a colored tint, whereas this way, adding color to a just standard glass gives it just a very faint tint, as opposed to the whole thing being that color. And so by adding a reflection probe, it will highly just benefit your reflection on your windows themselves. So we're going to turn this, oh boy. So what the reflection probe does, it gives additional benefits to the reflection of the wall. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have half of the wall be reflection and half of it just be normal opacity. And right there you can already see how much that reflection probe impacts the reflections on the glass. So now I'm going to scale this even more and see how it turns out. Maybe. If it chooses to. Okay, we'll just add another one just to help show that. I guess you can't scale it, it does it, you scale it differently. But that is such a better reflection. And even though maybe the color isn't quite what you want, look at the difference. So I'm going to turn off the probe, and then you turn it on, and you can just see how much of an impact that it has. But also utilizing the unique styles of glass is a great way to maximize your reflections. So going back to the Quixel library and then the glass that they have here. And maybe, wait a second, they might not have, I wonder if they don't have glass in the Quixel library. That's interesting. I never noticed that. So we'll just go to the normal materials and apply some glass. So if you have more of a mirrored glass, obviously the reflection is going to be very strong. And although that looks cool, it might not need as strong of a reflection plane, although you can still see the difference and how much that moves. But if you were to put like some sort of pattern on the glass, and the visibility is more opaque, there's not as much reflection. So it depends on using, you have to make sure you're using the right glass. This glass doesn't have a lot of reflective properties because it does have like a bump and a digital pattern on it. So the ones with the patterns are tougher to generate reflections just because of the nature of those designs. And the same thing when you start having like glass with stickers, things like that, you really won't have many reflections. You'll have a little bit. You can still see the difference between having the reflection probe and with not, but it's just very important to know that that will greatly improve your reflections. Now these chromatic really do a good job of showing the reflection on there. But another thing is, if you had nothing behind it, if you had no context or objects, there wouldn't be a lot of reflection. So let's go over to this market. And so if we were to just add a normal glass to it, okay, you see that there's not much reflection. So we'll add the reflection probe. Let me go back and spell properly. But what I'm trying to say is, okay, well, I need to go back completely. When you don't have a lot of context, it's going to be hard to reflect anything off of it. As the other one had that canopy and other objects, but this one doesn't have a lot of background, so you'll see how it can maybe impact. I'm not typing in anything. Oh no, I'm sorry for the delay. Now I am lost. What did I do? I'm actually not sure where I'm at. What the heck happened? I wish there was a way. Can I select something and then it takes me to there? Zoom to selection. Okay. Yikes. Oh no, it lost it again. Okay, we'll just try it from this elevation view, even though it's not exactly what we want. Now it's just being incredibly slow. I don't know what happened, but now we found our way back. So now you can see, yes, there's a reflection, but there's not as much to make it a very interesting reflection. And so just something to keep in mind while you're doing that. Do your renders look flat, lacking depth, or just not? Do your renders look flat, lacking depth, and not showing a lot of realism? It probably has something to do with your shadows. You have a shadow problem. Shadows provide accurate depth perception to the human eye. Our eyes are so well trained to pick out small details like this, but you can just have average shadows. But you can't just have average shadows. You must have the best shadows. But this is how you can create more realistic shadows. So you can see, based on the current lighting, there's some pretty hardcore shadows. But when you start going to render, those shadows aren't good enough. They're not going to cut it. It's not going to be super realistic with that kind of shadowing. So what you want to do is adjust these settings. So first of all, I'm going to get in a good spot just to show how important shadows can be. I'm going to change the time of day so that we can get the best to maximize the shadows. Okay, so it's not quite where I wanted to be, but we'll just redo that. And so the reflection also helps give better shadows as well, not as much as you would think. But so first you go to lighting, and we don't want to have a dynamic sky. One of the worst mistakes you can make is just start with a generic basic sky that provides no value whatsoever. So by adding like a skylight, you can see how the shadows are not as dark and the lighting is a lot different. But that is because we did more of a HDRI skylight environment. Now it might be a little bright for what we're trying to achieve, but we can definitely work with that. We can turn down the intensity, even though it says it's at noon. That's still very bright. You can also rotate the sky, and then that'll give you different angles just to help with creating unique shadows. So what you do is go into render settings, and you can change the shadow depth. And so you can kind of see how a shorter depth makes the shadows a lot thicker and the edges are more defined. And as you start to increase the shadow distance, the shadows kind of gradually ease in, which is definitely more realistic for most of the time. You can also change the shadow bias if something doesn't seem right. But for the most part, I don't mess with this. The shadows are fairly good in Twinmotion. So right now, I'm actually not a huge fan of this skylight. So what I'm going to do is replace it and change something with probably more clouds and unique shadows. So what I'm going to do is go into like morning, afternoon, like partly cloudy. It's a fairly good time to do it, and we'll import that here. Another way you can increase your shadows while this loads is